Welcome to the debate. Imagine you're standing at a really busy city intersection, right? And suddenly the traffic lights just completely lose power. You get to witness a very specific and frankly fascinating kind of human behavior.
Oh yeah, pure chaos.
Right, the precise engineering of that intersection, the red, yellow, and green lights, it vanishes. And suddenly the flow of thousands of pounds of metal is governed entirely by culture.
And it is a terrifying culture to watch, honestly. I mean, you see people inching their cars forward, aggressively making eye contact, waving each other on, or sometimes just laying on the horn and hoping for the best.
Exactly. And well, while it sometimes works, mostly it is incredibly inefficient. It relies entirely on everyone in that intersection perfectly interpreting invisible social cues under intense pressure.
Which is a lot to ask of people who just want to get to work.
Like telling you exactly when to stop and when to go, hesitation just becomes the dominant force. And for the corporate managers joining us today, you face this exact dilemma every single morning. How do you effectively empower your non-managers to take responsibility without creating organizational chaos?
Yeah, it is easily the defining challenge of modern management. What we're really looking at today is a fundamental conflict between two very distinct philosophies of governance from our source material. On one hand, we have action governance.
Right, specifically what the material calls the Non-Manager Work Action Framework, or NWAF.
Exactly, NWAF. And on the other hand, we have legacy cultural models.
So the central question we are unpacking here is this: should organizations govern action through strict structural definitions? Basically, should they build traffic lights? Or should they continue to rely on governing behavior and culture?
Right, operating on the assumption that good, smart employees will just, know when and how to act based on the vibe of the room.
I am arguing that corporate managers absolutely must adopt action governance and the NWAF model. Legacy cultural models are fundamentally failing. They give employees massive responsibility without structural authority, and that creates fatal hesitation. Governance has to be architecture, not behavioral theory.
And I will be taking the stance that while structural clarity, like the NWAF model, sounds like a perfect architectural solution on a whiteboard, legacy cultural models are actually essential.
Essential? Even with all that hesitation?
Yes, because they rely on interpretive behavior and cultural norms. You simply cannot mechanically govern every edge case or trigger in a complex organizational reality. The messy reality of human interpretation isn't a bug in the system. It is the only thing that actually keeps a modern company moving when the unexpected happens.
Well, let's test that logic right away, because relying on the messy reality of human interpretation is exactly why managers are burning out.
I disagree, but go on.
When a non-manager hesitates in the ranks, it usually doesn't stem from a lack of individual confidence or competence. It comes from unclear boundaries. To understand this, let's look at what the material calls the responsibility boundary.
Okay.
Under NWAF, this is a governed, explicitly documented definition of exactly what is mine to act on.
What defining exactly what is mine inherently defines what is not mine, right? If a manager aggressively draws that boundary, aren't you running this immense risk of encouraging a really siloed, not-my-job mentality?
Not necessarily.
Well, the reason legacy cultural models work is that they foster a sense of shared responsibility. Everyone owns the outcome.
Only in theory, though. In practice, shared responsibility often means no one's responsibility. Think about navigating an organization without these boundaries, like asking someone to play a highly competitive game of tennis without drawn court lines.
Okay, but a business isn't a game of tennis.
Hear me out. When a player hesitates in that scenario, they don't hesitate because they suddenly forgot how to swing the racket. They hesitate because they literally do not know where out of bounds is. You cannot ask a non-manager to swing the racket if you, the manager, refuse to paint the lines. NWFA gives them authority without a title precisely by painting those lines.
A corporation is not a tennis court, though. I mean, it is not a closed system with a flat surface and perfectly predictable physics. It's a living, breathing ecosystem.
But you still need rules of engagement.
Sure, but if you rely solely on painted lines, what happens when the ball lands in the stands and someone needs to go get it? The lines don't help you there. Shared behavioral expectations do. You're assuming that a manager can perfectly map out every boundary in advance, but organizational realities shift daily.
I think we need a concrete example here to ground this for our listeners. Let's imagine a running scenario. A junior quality assurance tester, a non-manager, is reviewing code 2 days before a massive software product launch.
Okay, high stakes.
Very high stakes. They spot an anomaly in the database architecture. Now, under a legacy cultural model, the manager expects this employee to just feel out the situation, read the cultural cues, and decide if this anomaly is worth stopping a multi-million-dollar launch.
Which a good employee would do.
But the employee is sitting there in this structurally risky, I'm not 100% sure space. And when an employee is not 100% sure, they hesitate. They ask a peer, they wait for the morning meeting, they write a, passive-aggressive Slack message.
Or, if the legacy culture is actually healthy, they immediately escalate it. Because the behavioral governance of the company prizes product integrity over launch speed. They step up based on a shared mission rather than waiting to check a structural boundary document before they decide to care about a problem.
But why make them rely on bravery? I mean, why make them guess if they are allowed to stop the launch? Innovative solves this by defining the responsibility boundary up front.
So what does that look like?
The boundary says, QA testers have the authority to act on database anomalies. Boom. The friction of, is this my place to speak up, is entirely removed.
Okay, well, let's follow your QA tester scenario. Let's say the manager painted the lines. The tester knows database anomalies are inside their boundary. But when are they supposed to act on it? Does every minor glitch require stopping the launch?
Well, no.
If you remove human interpretation, you need a mechanism to tell them exactly when to push the big red button.
Exactly. Which brings us naturally to the next core concept in the material, the admissible trigger. People freeze in unexpected situations because they don't know when their duty activates. The material stresses that an admissible trigger must be a governed, visible moment.
Wait, meaning what? Like a literal alarm bell?
Almost. It means a strictly defined, observable condition. It cannot be cultural, it cannot be emotional, and it cannot be interpretive. Back to our QA tester.
Okay.
An admissible trigger under NWAF isn't when the code feels risky. The trigger is if the database anomaly exceeds a 5% error rate in the staging environment, launch protocols are suspended. That is visible.
Right, but
When that trigger fires, the individual already knows they are responsible and they know the exact moment their duty activates. This stabilizes judgment, even in high-stress edge cases, because the activation is completely objective.
how can a corporate manager possibly predefine a trigger for a crisis no one has ever seen? You are arguing for a system that requires a manager to possess perfect foresight.
Not perfect, just governed foresight.
But judgment cannot be stable without interpretation and emotional intelligence. Let's use your exact trigger, a 5% error rate. What if the error rate is only 4.9%? Technically, the admissible trigger hasn't fired.
Well, then it hasn't fired.
But what if the context of that 4.9% error rate reveals a massive systemic security flaw that will expose customer data the second the software goes live?
If a 4.9% error exposes customer data, then the framework was poorly designed to begin with. A separate boundary and trigger for security vulnerabilities should have been architected.
But the employee only caught the security implication because of interpretive judgment. There was no visible trigger for the specific new strain of vulnerability. In complex edge cases, a reliance on culture, on behavioral governance, is the only way an employee can interpret an invisible trigger.
I wouldn't call that a trigger, I'd call that a guess.
They use their cultivated intuition based on experience and training. If you train your QA testers to only wait for an explicit admissible trigger, they will literally watch the company burn down while politely pointing out that the fire alarm never technically reached the required decibel level to mandate an evacuation.
You are romanticizing the exact thing that causes systemic failure. The source material is very clear on this premise. Relying on experience or cultural interpretation is exactly why people act too early or too late.
It's not romanticizing. It's just human reality.
You call it cultivated intuition. I call it guessing. When a non-manager is guessing if a 4.9% error is bad enough to warrant waking up the VP at midnight, they are taking all the structural risk of the organization onto their own shoulders. If they guess wrong, they get fired.
They get fired if the culture is toxic. In a healthy culture, they are praised for their vigilance.
But managers can't scale a vibe of vigilance. If the trigger isn't governed, it's not a framework. It's just hoping you hired brave people. When the trigger is visible and governed, it removes ambiguity. The individual doesn't have to wonder, is this my moment? The architecture tells them it is.
Architecture is an illusion in a complex adaptive system. It's just a snapshot of what the manager thought the world looked like yesterday.
It provides stability today.
But let's play this out. Let's say the boundary is drawn. Let's say the admissible trigger, the 5% error rate, has fired. The non-manager takes action. They hit the big red button and stop the launch. Now what?
Now the framework protects them.
Because whether that action was triggered by structure or by culture, managers still have to deal with the fallout of that decision. Delaying a launch costs millions.
And this is precisely where action governance proves its ultimate value to the modern corporate manager. Once the action is taken, we move to the governed action route. This is a pre-authorized evidentiary pathway. It is designed to convert raw judgment into governance-grade action.
Hold on, ground that jargon for me. What does a pre-authorized evidentiary pathway actually look like in a real office? Are we talking about filling out a form in triplicate?
No. It can be as simple as a specific JIRA ticket workflow, a standardized escalation protocol in ServiceNow, or an automated alert to a specific stakeholder group.
So it's a process flow.
The medium doesn't matter as much as the mechanism. The point is that the pathway for the action was built before the crisis. When an action route is governed, it makes the entire organization reconstructable.
Reconstructible?
Yes, it protects non-managers from the deeply unfair retrospective scrutiny of, why did you act? Or conversely, why didn't you act? The manager doesn't have to interrogate the employee's state of mind.
They just look at a JIRA ticket.
They just look at the route. The boundary was clear. The trigger was hit. The pre-authorized route was followed. The action is objectively defensible. It takes the heat off the individual and puts it on the framework.
Defensible? Evidentiary pathway? Do you hear the language you're using? Demanding a pre-authorized evidentiary pathway for every single action turns an organization into a courtroom rather than a collaborative enterprise.
It turns it into a transparent system instead of a political one.
No, it turns managers into judges and employees into defense attorneys. Think about the psychological reality of this for a second. If every action an employee takes must be routed through a governed evidentiary pathway just so it is defensible later, you are building an organization based on paranoia.
Paranoia?
Yes. You are trying to solve a fundamental problem of organizational trust with bureaucracy.
I wouldn't call it bureaucracy. I'd call it clarity.
If a non-manager is constantly terrified of the questions, why did you act or why didn't you act, that is not a failure of structural governance. That is a failure of leadership.
But leaders change.
Legacy cultural models, when they are built on strong behavioral governance and actual genuine trust, do not require managers to force employees to constantly build a defense brief for their actions. Blame isn't solved by creating rigid pathways. It's solved by a healthier culture where leaders back up their teams when they make interpretive judgment calls in the gray areas.
That is a beautiful sentiment, but it doesn't protect a non-manager's career when a multi-million-dollar mistake occurs and the CEO wants a head on a pike. Trust is a luxury. Governance is a requirement.
Trust is not a luxury, it's the foundation.
I firmly reject the idea that this is just paranoia or paperwork. Non-managers desperately need NWAF to rise in their careers. The material points this out explicitly. Non-managers rise when they act with clarity. Hesitation is fatal for career progression. If you rely entirely on a trust-based culture, what happens when a new manager takes over your department who doesn't share that trust?
Well, the culture shifts, which is a known risk, certainly.
It's an existential risk for the employee. Only a governed action route truly eliminates the structural risks and the blame that non-managers face. It stabilizes their career trajectory because their authority is decoupled from the subjective whims of a changing culture or a bad manager. They can point to the architecture and say, I did my job.
But by decoupling authority from culture, you are stripping the organization of its humanity. Yes, hesitation can be detrimental to a career, but so is robotic compliance to a flawed framework.
It's not robotic, it's structured.
Let's go back to our QA tester. If they followed the governed action route perfectly, but the software still crashed because of something outside the framework, what happens? Under action governance, the employee says, well, I filed the evidentiary pathway, not my fault.
Which is true.
But legacy governance assumes that you hire intelligent people and you cultivate an environment where their behavior aligns with the company's ultimate goals, making good software.
But they can still make good software while being protected by the framework.
When you replace a shared mission with action governance, you are implicitly telling your employees, we don't trust your judgment, we only trust the architecture. That might protect them from blame in the short term, but it severely limits their ability to truly lead, to innovate, and to navigate those gray areas of responsibility that dictate real business success.
I don't see how.
Because a manager's job isn't to build a perfect machine where no one has to think. A manager's job is to build a culture where people know how to think.
I'd argue that true innovation can only happen when the baseline of action is secure. You cannot ask an employee to innovate when they are standing on quicksand, wondering if they even have the authority to speak up about a problem.
Quicksand is a bit dramatic.
It's accurate. NWAF provides the bedrock. It governs the action, not the behavior, allowing the employee to use their mental energy for actual creative work, rather than exhausting themselves with political navigation.
And I maintain that navigating complex human dynamics, aligning with cultural values, and exercising interpretive judgment are not distractions from the work. In a modern corporation, they are the work.
Well, we have covered a lot of crucial ground today, and I think the lines of this debate are very clearly drawn for the managers listening. My position, rooted in the source material, is that action governance and the NWAF model represent a necessary structural evolution for corporate managers.
And it's a bold stance, I'll give you that.
By strictly governing the responsibility boundary so employees know where to play, defining the admissible trigger so they know when to act, and providing a governed action route to protect them afterward, managers can finally eliminate the ambiguity that paralyzes their teams. This architecture stabilizes judgment and protects the careers of non-managers by making their authority visible and their actions entirely reconstructible.
And my position is that legacy governance rooted in culture, behavior, and shared mission remains absolutely vital. While rigid architecture and pre-authorized pathways sound appealing, they simply cannot account for every edge case, unseen crisis, or 4.9% error rate.
Even though I disagree, I hear your point.
Human interpretation, emotional intelligence, and cultural trust are fundamentally required to navigate the messy gray areas of responsibility that no framework can perfectly predict. You simply cannot engineer your way out of the human element of business.
While we clearly disagree on the mechanism of the cure, I think there is a significant point of convergence here. We both entirely agree that non-managers frequently carry an unfair burden in today's corporate landscape, the burden of responsibility without the authority to execute it safely.
Absolutely. We are entirely aligned on the diagnosis. We both agree that hesitation is deeply detrimental to both the organization's bottom line and the individual employee's career progression. We just remain sharply divided on whether the ultimate solution is structural, as you suggest with NWAF, or behavioral and cultural, as I maintain.
Which brings us back to the corporate managers listening to us today. We want to leave you with a call to reflection based on this material. Look closely at your own teams this week. Look at where bottlenecks occur and ask yourself a very specific question. Where does my organization currently rely on culture instead of structure?
And when you identify those areas, look at the friction. Consider whether the ambiguity in those spaces is a feature that allows for flexible, innovative judgment, or if it is a bug that is breeding fear and hesitation. Exploring this balance between structure and culture in the source material will be absolutely vital for your leadership moving forward.
Think back to that city intersection we discussed at the beginning of the show. When the pressure mounts, the deadlines loom, and the unexpected inevitably happens. Are you completely confident your team can safely navigate the crossing through eye contact and cultural intuition alone? Or is it time to start building the traffic lights?
It is a question every manager has to answer for themselves.
Thank you for joining us for this intellectual exchange. We will leave it to you to decide how to build your organization's future.